convex insurance. Adonai, Herrero Martinez, Director, Environment and Sustainability, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Asusel Christus, and partner, VDA and professor, Nova School of Law. Yes. So that was a really nice segue into this session on our session Mobilizing Investment for Ocean Carbon Solutions. And Helen is, of course, a scientist here. And I would like to start off with asking Helen some scene-setting questions about the state of the science and basically what it is that we're discussing. And I think for the main public, the people, we're just coming to understand how important the ocean is to the Earth and the planetary system and to the climate system. So if you are able to shed some light on where we are with the state of the science, that would be great.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No, it's the mic not on.
Hi. Can you hear me now? Yeah? Okay. So the ocean is really very, very important to the climate system. And by virtue of its immense size, not just in area but in volume, and the far greater specific heat capacity of the sea and water compared to air. And because of that heat capacity, one of the principal roles that the ocean plays in the climate system is keeping us cool. So the ocean has absorbed an estimated 93% of the excess heat captured by greenhouse gas emissions since the onset of the Industrial Revolution. And today is capturing heat at an even faster rate than it was in the past as more heat is being added to the planet. So the heat capturing role is really fundamental. And if you want to put it into units that are sort of easier to imagine than this 90% of heat, what does that mean? It means the equivalent of 3 to 5 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs being exploded into the ocean every second of every day. And if you think about that in terms of the number of nuclear bombs of heat being added per day, it's 250 to 430,000 nuclear bombs. So that is the amount of heat which is sort of being added to the planet. And no wonder things are getting hot right now. So heat redistribution and absorption is the fundamental role, but also carbon capture and storage. So the ocean has absorbed an estimated 25–26% of greenhouse gas emitted carbon dioxide in the last several hundred years, and is continuing to uptake carbon dioxide, helping us to reduce the rate at which the climate is changing. And the carbon dioxide enters the sea and it's dissolved in the water, or it's fixed by phytoplankton, and then some of it settles to the seabed and is incorporated into those seabed sediments. There's another source of carbon which goes into the sea, of course, and that is terrestrial runoff. So we have carbon that's coming down rivers in the form of organic matter that's being washed out into the sea and is then being dropped down and incorporated into sediments. One of the reasons why we're very interested in ocean carbon storage right now is because of the fragility of some of the terrestrial carbon stores. All of the more optimistic of the Paris climate scenarios depend on capture of carbon in some way, and nature's part in that capture of carbon is really important. And so we're rightly busily replanting forests, protecting habitats, trying to safeguard permafrost in the northern hemisphere primarily. But those carbon stores are really quite insecure, as we see with floods, drought, wildfires. They are being re-released as carbon dioxide. There is no drought or flood might say, or wildfire under the ocean. So to begin with, we might think that those carbon stores are more secure. What, of course, we do to them is that we are disturbing them in various ways, and that disturbance is potentially re-releasing some of the carbon that has been incorporated into sediments, which expose it to oxygen again, that could lead to conversion into carbon dioxide, and then through oceanography, re-release it into the atmosphere. So we're very interested to know how much carbon dioxide is being lost from these marine sedimentary carbon stores that the last panel was talking about back into the atmosphere. And we need to know these things to figure out how much of an ally the ocean is and how to manage it better to maximize its potential in carbon capture.
So is it straightforward to understand what is happening? I mean, are there any bottlenecks in terms of, I mean, we need further research in this field, we want more investment, but from your perspective as a scientist, I mean, what are some of the things that we need to clear to accelerate this process?
I think we need more knowledge and understanding of how carbon is being lost. What is the, quantitatively, how much carbon are we losing when we disturb it from the seabed? There's an estimate out there which was calculated in 2021 by a group of scientists led by Enric Sala that estimated the emissions from these seabed disturbance events, primarily by fishing, were equivalent to the emissions from the global aviation industry. Of course, after the splash, the backlash, and scientists come out and say, you've got your sums wrong. Your orders of magnitude out. And nobody's exactly sure which numbers are right at the moment. So we are trying to find better numbers and to lead through the Convex Seascape Survey, an international scientific study of ocean carbon storage so that we can understand much better where the carbon is, how vulnerable it is to disturbance, where it is being disturbed, how much is being lost through that disturbance, and how do we go about protecting it.
And has it been a straightforward process?
It hasn't been straightforward. And when you start a project, this is a 5-year project. It involves a lot of people and organizations. You frame the problem as a relatively simple one. Let's track the fate of carbon that is being resuspended into the water column and figure out, what happens to it after that and how much is reincorporated into marine sediments. And unfortunately, as scientists always do, they find that the problem is much more complex than they anticipated. And so we are, I would say, 3 years into a 5-year project at the point of maximum complexity. We've added more and more things into the mix of what we think may be affecting the outcome of that seabed disturbance for carbon, but we're not sure what the most important pieces are yet. And over time, we'll be able to throw out the ones that are less important and focus in, narrow down on the most important factors and come up with some stronger numbers that are more defensible and that a good policy can be produced upon the basis of.
Thank you, Callum. And so now from here, I want to turn to how do we unlock critical finance for ocean carbon projects? And we have private finance perspective, development finance perspective, and legal framework expert on our panel. So Rachel, I'd like to turn to you first. And from the private finance perspective, you belong to Convex Insurance, and why is Convex Insurance supporting seabed carbon research?
Is this working? I think as far as insurance is concerned, we have 3 ways that we can impact ocean health and indeed its role in the fight against climate change. One is what and how we insure. The second is our investments, the extent to which we direct some of our impact investments towards ocean-related initiatives. And then, and then also whether we finance or can finance carbon or biodiversity solutions. And yes, so those are the sort of main. And then the third one is whether we want to back a scientific research program. So just coming on to that one, a key pillar, one of the 3 pillars of our sustainability strategy is advancing transition. And with transition, we mean the transition to a low carbon economy and all that comes with and the plan to net zero. So we realise as insurers how robust data is really a critical part of that. So when we learned, in fact, the research program that Callum has referred to, this Convex Seascape Survey, is a partnership between Blue Marine Foundation, the University of Exeter, and indeed there are other institutions around the world as well, and ourselves. So when through our engagement with the University of Exeter and Blue Marine Foundation, we learned quite what an absence of robust data there is in exactly what Callum has described. It just seemed too important a part of the carbon cycle for it to be ignored. And the founder of my firm and the exec chairman, a chap called Stephen Catlin, has in the past sponsored, in fact, indeed 15 years ago was the first time, so sort of before the finance world got interested in environmental projects, has sponsored big environmental projects, one of which was looking into the impact of melting ice sheets in the Arctic. The second one was about the impact of rising sea temperatures on coral reefs. So, and the sort of key thread amongst these is that yes, they're environmental, but they're also all about open source data. So we have no particular angle on it. We're simply saying that this is an important aspect of the carbon cycle, and with our support, the work of the academic institutions can be really leveraged.
Thank you. And how do you see private financing supporting the development of nature-based assets?
So going on to those other 2 pillars, aspects where I think we can have some influence, on the investment side, we have started to do some impact investments on the ocean related. So we've invested, for example, in Ocean 14, a fund that's not in the deep sea, it's mainly doing fisheries and sustainable, but I think paying attention to and looking for opportunities in that way is interesting, and potentially infrastructure related, ocean infrastructure related could be a way as well. And then as far as the credit world is concerned, biodiversity and carbon related credits, I think that's really interesting, and we're sort of paying a lot of attention to that. And indeed, this is why, one of the reasons why robust data is really needed. But I think we have to be super clear on what are the incentives for it. The carbon markets, the voluntary carbon markets, grew largely because the compliance markets were at the sort of forefront of it all 20 odd years ago. And then regulation and corporate commitments to net zero have really helped that. And important regulation like CSRD, one of the European regulations, which includes biodiversity impact as well as climate and carbon impact, I think are important. But this is under threat now. So I think we have to be super clear on what is going to be the incentives before we get too excited about. We've got to know that people are going to do this, right? And the corporate world can walk away. So, we buy voluntary carbon offsets. I'm very interested in what we can do towards biodiversity, but it will need, continued frameworks, etc., and a lot of attention on that. And then the aspect of how we insure is clearly really important as well. There is a good example of, for example, insurance of a coral reef. So there's a great thing that was done a couple of years ago where they insured a number of coral reef sites in the Caribbean, which were vulnerable to hurricane, to extreme wind risk. And because of a relatively neat technique called a parametric trigger, where you just say, if a hurricane of a certain strength hits, then this thing pays out. And it means that it can be sort of scaled in the insurance markets to do that because of this. So by through that mechanism and through that transaction, they were able to protect. I think it's something like there's something like 2 million people in coastal communities who would otherwise be vulnerable to this, and indeed something like 3 billion of revenues. So there are examples of where nature-based assets that were unheard of as being insured in the past are now being insured. And then I think also what can be leveraged quite a lot is the insurance world is very active in political and credit risk insurance, and that can really help have an impact on the amount of investment that, for example, MDBs can invest in. So I think we have to be really sort of ambitious for what insurance can do in bringing its sort of underwriting capability to find the solutions here.
And I just realized you've mentioned, robust data that keeps on coming up. And I mean, of course, this data issue is coming up everywhere, in every session in UNOC as well. But why is a robust open source science critical to underpin these assets and attract serious investment?
Yeah, I'd say, I think if you look at the challenges of the carbon markets, right, so it's not that they, it's difficult getting good data. And the carbon markets have gone through a real sort of ups and downs. And I think when we start to look at biodiversity and the data there, I think we should sort of take a learning on how not just getting the really good robust data, but also getting the good oversight of it. So the sort of policing, the auditing, all of that, I think is really important. So I was keen to, I think it was a year ago that it was first established, but there's an organisation that is about the International Policy for Biodiversity Credits Action Plan. Yes, exactly. So they are doing. I think that's a good thing that you need for giving a sort of cohesive framework so that when data is going to be contributing to this can then be, there's a framework for how you're going to go and audit that. Because what's not been helpful, when people are looking into the voluntary carbon markets, if the projects, the institutions that the accreditation that will verify these, it's difficult, right? I'm not underestimating how difficult it is, but that really needs. I think we need collectively to be putting a lot of resource into how that's going to be done in a really robust way, because it then ends up being too easy an excuse to say, oh, we won't bother doing biodiversity or carbon offsets because journalists will, because it's going to be trashed. Whereas my view would be go and look and do the robust ones, go and be thorough about it. And, yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. I'd now like to turn to Adonai from the development finance perspective. And what challenges do you face in creating a sustainable market for blue carbon?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting us to speak today here. So we introduce a bit the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is maybe some part of the audience hasn't come across. We are a development bank, which has been operating since the 1990s, mostly focused on project finance and private sector investment. We invest about 17 billion euros per year in about 600 projects, so our average project size is 30 million, roughly. So rather large projects, right? Again, with a private sector market creation focus. Why? It was created in the 90s to promote transition to fully operating market economies in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Therefore, you're asking me about market creation. This is part of our DNA, together with environmental sustainability. That's the reason why I'm here. And that's where the challenge comes in. Because in order to create markets, we need to support, we're mandated to support projects that are actually bankable. And that's where the still Achilles heel of carbon markets, blue carbon markets, revenue streams generated from these sources of credits are just not long-term, not constant, and quite volatile, right? So when we face our risk officers, credit risk officers, and try to advocate for bringing in carbon credits as a source of revenues for our financial models, they actually deny this as short-term and rather volatile. So, from a financing's perspective, we need long-term stable revenue streams to integrate into the models and ensure a minimum, just purely debt service cover ratio. I think that's the key word for our credit officers, the SCR. But let me end with a positive note, because I know I will come across as a cold-blooded banker otherwise. I think Callum alluded to it. The Paris Agreement pledges by countries, by sectors, by companies offer a magnificent opportunity to actually revert that trend of volatility and insecurity in terms of generating cash flows. Because carbon markets tend to be shifting towards high quality carbon credits that actually sequester carbon. Nature is by definition the best carbon capture and storage mechanism, right? And the Paris Agreement pledges require decarbonization for mitigation, which in many industries will always have residual emissions. So companies eventually will have to actually buy carbon removals. And nature, in particular blue carbon, we know it's much more efficient than land-based carbon removal credits. So these might be a very good opportunity for actually investors that invest in carbon.
Successful projects or partnerships that EBRD supported in this space?
Thank you, Micah. That's a good question. Let me start with how we came about to the blue economy, right, as an institution. When a few years ago, about 5 years ago, when we brought the concept of the blue economy to the institution, actually the reception, again, was rather lukewarm from our vantage. Why? Because they thought private sector focus on regional operations, Eastern Europe, Central Asia. Where are our seats, right? Then we realized that we had possibly one of the most paradigmatic examples of blue economy activities in the whole portfolio of MDBs. The work we did in the Baltic through wastewater treatment plants, which actually was tracked by the Helsinki Convention. There you have the science, tracking the impacts and monitoring the impacts of those investments. And we saw that there had been especially biodiversity benefits from that removal of phosphorus and nitrogen of the species coming back to the Baltic Sea and the Gulf of Finland. Okay. Thanks to that, and that's why I'm so excited today to be here. We got inspired and have replicated that partnership, this Northern Dimension Environmental Partnership, now in the Mediterranean, in the form of the Blue Mediterranean Partnership. Let me allow me for a moment of national pride, because today, an hour ago, I left the event. Our Vice President for Ecological Transition just signed a contribution of 8.5 million euros for the partnership. So, well, you should thank her. Vice President Agensen, a lady, she's a Spanish Vice President. She signed this contribution, and what we are trying to do is actually to provide grant financing to kickstart those projects that have positive environmental impacts around the sea. And it's a beautiful coincidence. I don't want to extend too much, but it's a beautiful coincidence. I came in when the gentleman from the ACABA was speaking, because our first project as EBRD that we're bringing to the partnership is our support to Isla Oasis in ACABA, a private sector property project whose visionary investor thought that recovering the natural reef in front of the hotel, as well as investing in an artificial marina, which uses microfragmentation to create a coral nursery, was a good idea. We're supporting the expansion of that work with our funds, and that this would be possibly the most paradigmatic example of a commercially based, nature positive project in the tourism sector. We would like to replicate this example across other countries.
And so, having worked on all of these projects, what are some of the learnings that you have that you would like to share with the audience about this is how you secure financing?
Yes.
Or this is how you don't secure financing?
Yeah, I think maybe both. Yeah, I think Callum alluded, let me go back 1 second. Callum alluded to and I think Jason before, referred to integrating biodiversity benefits into the blue carbon projects, and that's critical, because we know that many of these projects, like the regeneration coral reefs, have a relatively limited carbon capture potential for the long term, but not in the short term. And we need to ultimately, if we are to recover our marine ecosystems, any kind of ecosystem, we need to internalize the environmental externalities that those projects bring in, right? And carbon markets might be one of the tools that would allow us to achieve this. But the problem is demand. How are we going to stimulate demand demand for those kind of credits, for those biodiversity credits. So it is in conferences such as this one, the United Nations Ocean Conference, where regularly, where the global community gets together in actually, Jason was saying that regulations, maybe they're not great. Actually, we need those regulations to trigger demand for these type of credits. So that's the main lesson I would share with the audience.
Thank you very much. And that's actually a very good because we're going to be talking about the importance of legal certainty. And so, of course, you're a legal expert. And what do you mean by legal certainty? And I know we were discussing this before, but in ocean carbon projects, and why is it essential for market development? Yes.
Legal certainty. Yes. Thank you. It's a really pleasure to be again with The Economist. I have two hats, so I'm a law professor and I'm a practitioner lawyer, so I can see both angles. And the fact is that if we don't have clear rules securing the rights that we are willing to sell, because that's what we want to monetize something, that will not happen. Or that will happen in a poor manner, which means that in the medium term, we will have litigation. We will have greenwashing accusations. We will have people coming to the courts to comply with what they have bought that at the end was not what they thought they have bought. So, and this needs to be tackled from the very first beginning. And the very first beginning, when we're talking about blue carbon, is the access to the maritime space. And this is different from what we have in land, because in land normally, not all around the globe, normally we have private property, so we can sell, we can rent, we can use with a kind of freedom these pieces of land. That is not what is happening in the ocean. Normally the ocean belongs to public domain. And this, of course, has an international framework within the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, but then the national jurisdictions will play a role putting the rules to the use of that maritime space. And the first thing, or I would say that the first aspect where legal certainty needs to be addressed is to the access of the maritime space. What is my title to go there and to either conserve or deploy or reforest or whatsoever? Am I able to do that? Do I have the proper right to do that? Do I have the permit to do that? For how long? Normally, if we're talking about a public domain, you will not be allowed to make it yours forever. You might have a certain period of time. Will it be 10 years, 20, 50 years? How will that match with the economic part? So that is one aspect right in the very first beginning. Then you have other aspects, methodologies, robust methodologies. That claims science a lot. Do we have the necessary methodologies to make sure that we are really, again, doing what we are planning to do and what we are communicating and what we are selling once we have issued a carbon credit or biodiversity credit, which is even more difficult, I would say. In a certain point, I will explain. Methodology. What is the robust methodology that you have? That has the scientific part, but that has the legal part as well. And that needs to be clear, depending on the framework that you will use. Who is the owner of the framework? Right now, from a European perspective, and I'm based in Portugal, Lisbon, so I have both the national perspective and the European perspective. We have regulation on European regulation on certification of carbon removals, which I'm looking or will look at carbon farming, also including the coastal areas, but still there's a methodology to be approved on that. But of course, the permanence criteria or principle and the additionality principle is really strict. Also from a Portuguese perspective, we have a decree law on voluntary carbon markets, which drops a word on the priority of blue carbon, but we need the methodologies to be approved. And that is a second layer of certainty. Then we have the questions on contracts. Who are the parties? Are there any intermediates? who brings the rights, who pays